Good
Hello,
afternoon.
everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AWE Digital Wellness Podcast. I'm here again with my co host, Christian Dominique. Christian, how are you doing?
Very good. I have designed my space and my time for this attention for you and for our listeners.
Design is on my mind. We are talking about environmental design for attention today. This is a really interesting topic for a lot of people. Wherever you're tuning in from, YouTube, LinkedIn, X, thank you for joining us today. Environmental design. Christian, what does environmental design mean?
It's climate change and redesigning the planet and going to Mars. No, I think
That's what I
we're
thought. Yeah.
talking about designing our work environment, our life environment, our play environment. It's not just we need to have attention for play as well, not just work. We need to have attention for our love. We need to have attention for our relationships, right? So it's designing our lives in every aspect. Of course, for the LinkedIn people maybe work, for the Facebook people may play or both. But we're always thinking about a holistic approach, right? And how can we design to have the good attention at work, at your studies, in your relationship, in your creative time, and in your playtime, right? So let's talk about all of those things.
It's going to be a really exciting conversation. And I think we've got some interesting studies as well that we're going to be looking at today, some interesting books that perhaps some people who are listening to this have heard of. Why is environmental design such a prescient, relevant topic in 2026? Why is it so important for us to talk about this today?
It's important because, as we've discussed in many podcasts, and one of the things that our digital wellness is trying to bring back to the world
Mm,
is for people to pay attention, right? Because you are paying attention, because attention is the most valuable commodity now.
mm,
And some people have figured out how to distract you and to get some of that attention, right? So we are
mm.
distractible, we are distracted, we are. Um, I was reading study that from 2 minutes and a half, now we're at 40 something seconds that we can watch something on average. I was talking to someone this week that said that was with a friend at a movie, and the friend took the cell phone out and could not watch a whole movie. Right? It's like
Yeah.
that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common. I've even heard that from my friends myself that uh, people have trouble watching movies. They literally can't sit through the entire movie. And what does that mean? It means that we're being conditioned for much shorter form content than a movie, which is usually an hour and a half, 2 hours of your sustained attention. And people can't even manage that. So it's not just books, it's movies now, which used to be the baseline. And now the baseline is becoming Instagram videos, perhaps. So, I want to perhaps start this podcast by sharing a story from something I experienced this week. A mother actually reached out to me, a very concerned mother, about her 19-year-old son who's going off to college next year. But she's very worried because he is spending inordinate amounts of time on his phone. He's spending lots of time on YouTube. He's isolating himself. And obviously, that's very concerning. As a parent, it's very concerning when your child is not doing what you expect of him. And I think this mother was also very concerned that he's not going to fulfill his potential. But more than that, it's a critical period in someone's life. So when we're talking about environmental design, we're not only speaking to people who may be remote workers who are tuning in, or people who are working in front of a computer. If you have children, if you have a loved one, if you have some people in your life, younger people, this is a very, very important issue to talk about. Very important issue because the brain is still developing, right? The prefrontal cortex hasn't finished developing until the age of 25. And this is a very critical period, formative years for anyone. And if you want to just spend it in front of a screen, that's time that you can't get back, essentially. And it might not seem like it a lot if you spend a day scrolling on Instagram, but that amounts to many, many hours over the course of a year. And years go by. As you get older, time tends to go by faster, and people are, losing their lives essentially because they're not thinking consciously about the environment that they're in and how they design their environment. So
Yeah,
again, very,
thanks for
yeah.
sharing. And I also have some stories from parents. I was doing a workshop with some parents of quite young kids the week before. I was with teenagers, but this was more like 4 years old to 11, 12, and talking to educators and parents and the kids, and had some pretty disturbing things when it comes from attention. And I was talking to this mom, which is a single mom, and was saying, well, I feel bad, but I try to limit the time for my kid. It's 30 minutes, but then I'm busy, so it turns out to be an hour. And um, it's like, because at first you think that the tool to help the kid play and be quiet is a digital tool, right? And perhaps I was telling her, like, perhaps it would just be better to let the kid play with pots and pans, or with whatever else that is a little bit less addictive by design. Um, and then you have, when we're talking about designing for attention, right? So, like, how is your workplace, your house, your environment made to have people be able to sit down and read a book, right? So we talked about reading books. Yes, I read a few of those, but some people have difficulty now, even watching movies, even watching a medium form content online, right? So one thing that we have to design is our physical environment, but also our digital environment, right? So we can talk about people that have 100 windows open, which sometimes is my case. So I'm also guilty of that. We can talk about a lot of notification. We can talk about a desktop that has all types of clutters. The digital, many screens with different things. Also, people are working with a TV on that might be distracting, or a tablet, or right. So the number of distractions are endless, and we talk often now that people are often on the second screen, right? So they're working, but there's a second screen. They're watching a movie, but they're also watching their phone because they're watching a text, right? They're watching a tablet, a computer, a screen, right? So this is also a design, right? How many screens do you have? What do you do? What are they on? What's going on? And we can also design in terms of time. Do we have a time block that says, hey, from this time to this time, I'm not to be disturbed. I'm focused on this. And how can you actually implement that when there are some distraction, right? And we had an episode completely talking about willpower, right? So it's not that you don't have the willpower, is that your environment and your habits are not conducive for you to have intention. It's not that you intentionally don't want to do something and that you don't have the will or the willpower. It's more likely that you have to plan and organize and design your environment to succeed and to sustain attention.
I think, I remember reading about this in Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talked about the myth of willpower, that the myth of willpower is essentially the belief that successful people have a supernatural ability to resist temptation just through sheer mental strength. And I think Clear argues in the book that, and this builds on research from psychologists like Kurt Lewin and Anne Thorndike, I believe, that there's a total misunderstanding of how that human behavior actually works. And he argues essentially that environments beat grit every time. Our environment is like the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. And so we often believe that our actions are a result of our choices, but they are frequently just a response to the most obvious visual cues in our surroundings, right? So for example, you have the proximity principle. That means you are more likely to eat the cookies on the counter than the apple in the crispier drawer, right? Regardless of your willpower. And then there's the path of least resistance, right? So humans are biologically wired to conserve energy. will almost always choose the easiest option available. Disciplined people simply make the right choice, the easiest choice. That's how it is. So they're better at designing an environment where the right choice is the easiest choice, right? Essentially, if you believe the myth of willpower, you're going to deplete a lot of your mental resources. You're going to feel exhausted. You're going to feel burned out, right? So, why try to rely on this myth that's just making you feel exhausted in the end? You can think of willpower like a battery or a muscle. And every time you have to say no to a distraction, like a notification or a TV remote or just some sort of message that somebody might be sending you, you use up a small amount of mental energy. So this creates decision fatigue, and that, just essentially makes this willpower battery drained. So you don't feel like you can make any decisions. And this is why a lot of people who rely on sheer willpower usually tend to just become exhausted by 5 p.m. They can't focus anymore, and it's just becomes more difficult than ever. So a possible alternative would be a person who leaves their phone in another room, and they are not using the willpower at all. For example, when I come into my office here, my first thought is, okay, I need to leave my phone in the other room. The phone is not allowed in this place. And I do that intentionally because I know that if the phone is here, I know that if I get a notification, I know even if there's not a notification, the thought will be the trigger. The thought, I'm bored, I want to go on Instagram, that will be enough of a trigger. You can even go a step ahead. You can like give your phone to somebody else for the entire day and say, I don't want to check my phone. I'm just going to be here. I'm going to force myself into a situation where I have to do the tasks. You can use an app blocker on your computer and really say there's only one task I'm going to do. And that essentially seems to work for a lot of people. So essentially what he says, is that there's this concept of addition by subtraction. Instead of trying to be strong, you make it the bad habit harder to perform by adding friction to it, essentially. That's what you want to do with environmental design.
I agree. I just want to make a small, clarification when you talk about decision fatigue. In this case, we're also talking about ego fatigue, right? So the term means people who are resisting temptation. After a while, they can resist, but they get, as you mentioned, losing some energy. And
Mr. Dominique left in the middle of talking, which is okay. I will take over. Oh, you're back again. Hello.
my ego is fatigued.
Your ego was too fatigued. Sorry. Well, hopefully it's restored again. So I was really curious about what you had to say. What's the difference between ego and decision fatigue?
So decision fatigue is that you have too many decisions that might be different choices, like too many books, too many movies, too many sexual partners, too many job offers, too many whatever, too many cars to choose. And that's also a product of too much channels to choose, too much information with the information age, right? That's kind of the decision fatigue. And the ego fatigue is more you resisting a same stimuli that is attractive to you, that is distracting, that you might have some desire to do and you have to resist. And that's the same that you're losing energy against.
So this ego fatigue is resisting the same decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you give me an example of that?
An example would be wanting to, you talked about, a cookie or ice cream, right? So not going to have my ice cream. Okay. Not going to have the ice cream. Okay. After you say that 45 times, then maybe the chances are you'll have the ice cream.
I see. Okay. So it's resisting. If you have the thought of eating the ice cream again and again and again and again, then eventually there's a chance that you could cave into eating the ice cream.
Yeah. And that's why environmental design is good. And when we talk about substance abuse disorder or behavioral addiction. We've worked with addiction clinics and all types of addictive
Mm.
behavior and disorders. And those are really key components sometimes when someone wants to change a habit to kind of design an environment, right? So alcoholics might not want to have alcohol in the house. People that are perhaps addicted to food, binge eating, or have some of those habits might not want to have those in the house.
Mm.
People that you know, let's say we're addicted to hard drugs or methamphetamine, crack, all those beautiful drugs, and fentanyl now. You might not want to go walk in the street where you know where the crack house is, right?
Mm.
Take a different route, right? Because if you go there, you're going to use that ego fatigue principle, which will make you
Mm-hmm.
use that like you said, myth of willpower, but make a decision, and it will be harder and harder to do that, right? So actually what's better to do, and that's what we embed also in our methodology at awe, is to not have to decide of something negative not to do. The best way to do is to find awe or something even more awesome that you don't have to say, I don't want to do this, because you want to do something much more. Right?
Mm. Yeah, I think we're talking about an interesting intersection between discipline, environmental design, and addiction in a
Yeah.
certain sense. And these things tend to overlap sometimes with each other. So it's not that disciplined people just have more willpower than you do, right? I'm going to say something right now that might just shatter the concept of addiction or discipline for a lot of people. You know, a lot of research has actually shown that people with high self-control spend less time struggling with temptations. And that's not because they're better, they're stronger, they have more discipline muscles in their brain, right? Or that they even have more willpower, essentially. It's just that they spend more time in disciplined environments.
Yeah.
So I think something that James Clear says in the book, it's easier to practice self-control when you don't have to use it very often. That's the key here, is that if you know that you have ADHD and you get distracted easily, then you consciously design an environment with very little distractions. Then you can exceed, right? Or you put yourself in a place where the right types of distractions are going to reward you instead of hurt you. And the problem is that I think a lot of people nowadays, and we're seeing more and more incidents of ADHD in younger populations. The problem is that we're getting rewarded for the wrong things. We're getting rewarded for things that actually profit other people. And so it's important that the listeners shift. They need to move away from this idea of shame, like I'm lazy or I'm weak because I'm just watching videos. They need to move more to an architectural sort of thinking. What that means is like my room right now is designed for distraction. The house I'm living in is designed for distraction. The my current setup, my routine is designed for a distraction. And if you want to change your life, you don't just change yourself. As Clear says, you change your shelf essentially. You have to change your entire house, apartment, and make sure that, hey, I know that I usually get distracted around 2 p.m. So make a rule that you just leave the house and go for a walk at 2 p.m. or go to the gym, right? You have the power to influence how many distractions there are in the environment.
Yeah, and coming back to the addiction analogy, or how, and we can talk for hours about addiction, but basically we talked about spectrum of many things, and everyone has some type of addiction or addictive behavior, because again, it's habits, and it's easier to spend less energy to do things by rote than by habit, right? So in the drug and substance abuse clinics, they talk a lot about paraphernalia, right? So it's objects that will remind you of your substance abuse. And then if you have those around or you're in contact with them, you have more cravings, and then you have to do also more work to have to be resilient or resist those temptation, right? Um, so if we can think of many things in your life that are a distraction, right? It doesn't have to be a hard drug or
Mm.
a drug. Many things can have that temptation and remind you of, like you said, it could be a physical thing, but it could be time, right? I know that around 2 o'clock, that's my trigger that I'm getting cravings for this or I'm getting distracted for this. And the more, and again, with those podcasts and in general, we're trying to raise awareness and awareness to the public, but also self awareness. And if you're aware of your cues and things that are giving you to give the right or wrong or maladaptive behavior that decreases your attention and focus for again for your work, for your family, for whatever you want to accomplish in a day or a week,
Mm.
start to notice them. Now, is the change easy? Probably not. But like you said, it's not just changing you, your mentality. Yes, we have neuroplasticity. Yes, we can change our brain, um, but we can make it easier if we have a plan, right?
100% agree. And I think, you know, we've mentioned ADHD on this podcast a few times. And again, there's an interesting overlap between addiction, discipline, ADHD, environmental design here. Um, I just want to reference one study, and there's a study looking at the role of the default mode network in not only ADHD but just how easy it is for people to complete tests. So the default mode network, part of your brain that's responsible essentially for thinking when you don't think you're really thinking. So we go out throughout our day, we have around 16,000 thoughts that just go through our mind every day, and the default mode network is responsible for essentially daydreaming, right? When you're just kind of lost in thought. And so there was a finding from a study in 2007 by Castellanos in neurotypical brains. When you start a task, the daydreaming part of the brain, the default mode network essentially switches off. In ADHD brains, the default mode network stays active, creating an internal environment of noise. So what does this mean? So the physical environment design is a non-negotiable for people with ADHD. If your internal environment is noisy, your external environment must be aggressively quiet in order to compensate for that. I've seen a lot of people online, talk about their ADHD preventing them from actually getting work done. Yeah, you can look at it that way, but I think what I've seen in my own clients is that if they label this problem as my ADHD, it's like, it's possible that is an accurate clinical diagnosis, but is it helpful in the moment to just say like it's my ADHD is holding me back? If the ADHD is holding you back in the current setup, why not change it? Why not experiment? Why not see what sort of environment would actually help me focus a lot better? Okay, if I know that sitting at my desk all day and I'm having difficulty focusing, okay, then switch it up, right? Just try going to a cafe, try going to a co-working space, try doing something else, try going for a run, try jumping on a trampoline, try gamifying it in some sort of way. Essentially, the ADHD brain craves some sort of tangible reward. So every time you complete a task,
Now it's Mark's time to disappear, I guess.
there I was also ego depleted that right then.
So yeah, we're talking about ADHD and the default mode network. So go on.
Yeah, and there was another large-scale study in Lancet Psychiatry done in 2019 that showed that there was a significant correlation between ADHD and addiction. So roughly 25% of adults with substance use disorders also met the criteria for ADHD. So for many, addiction is an attempt at self-medicating an undiagnosed attention deficit. That's what it is essentially.
I didn't get the percentage of that study.
25% of adults with substance use disorders also meet the criteria for ADHD, right? So, and this has always been a discussion with behavioral addictions, is how much of the behavioral addiction is just undiagnosed ADHD, right? that's just
Very
causing people to spend more and more time. Because essentially, when we talk about a behavioral addiction, right? If somebody's watching pornography, if they're scrolling all day, it's a coping mechanism for boredom, for an unstimulated life, like lacking adventure. Something's missing in your life, and the out is essentially to just go on your phone or just distract yourself away from the pain.
We'll go back to the subject of design, but since you mentioned default network, I was actually a couple of days ago at a
Mm,
neurogenesis, a neuroscience conference here at the Neuro in Montreal, the McGill facility, with my friend Dr. Majid Mojeni, who was presenting on the default mode network and explaining his theory that the default mode network is also the default memory network, right? And interesting, a little bit of a tangent, but kind of new. There is not so much convincing data on the subject yet, so uh, to be confirmed. But looking at the default mode network being kind of the crux of where memory is formed, right? So there's memory consolidation that is normally done in the REM cycle, consolidated memory at any time, but there's more consolidation at sleep, and especially during the REM cycle. We know that some neurodivergent people need more or less sleep or more or less REM cycle, depending, and that they can consolidate more or less memories. But what was interesting is that he also mentioned that um, ruminating or having the default network active is actually also a form of consolidating memory, right? So because when you're in active focused task, then you're doing the task, but you might not be consolidating it. You might be using it in more short-term memory.
mm.
And just an interesting finding that you might be actually using potentially some of the default mode network to consolidate memory. So
Could you explain again what does it mean to consolidate memory?
so putting it in the long-term memory.
Interesting. Okay.
And it will also use, of course, the hippocampus and other regions of the brain. There is a lot of interesting, complex things about memory and the waves and how there was some EEG in fMRI studies. There was another researcher looking at an amnesic patient that could still um, have memory with almost destroyed the hippocampus. But just to come back to the default mode network, again, new findings. This is like really, really recent research that is looking at potentially the default mode network being one of the keys to consolidating memory. That the other, the prefrontal cortex, the executive control network, and
Mm.
others might be using the default mode primarily as consolidating. So not exclusively, but primarily. So just some thoughts and trying to see if other things like I was talking to him about is non-sleep deep rest also allowed to be like what we would call those lesser or offline or deactivated brain state where the default comes back and you can consolidate memory.
Mm.
But that will be for another neuroscience geek talk. Let's go
Mhm.
back to the design. And by the way, this is live as is every Friday. If you are on the live and you have any questions about neuroscience, about design, about attention, we have a Q&A that you can ask some challenging or fun questions on the chat. So what would you say that, in terms of physical space, what would be one or two things that people should consider? And then we'll talk about other. I also have some studies that I want to share with you and the audience. But
Mhm.
physical space, what are some of the cues that you think might help design for attention and focus?
Well, I think it depends on what the goal of the person is, right? For example, one of my tasks, and you know this, Christian, is reaching out to a lot of people per day. And I have to remind myself, to cold call, for example. I have a sheet on my desk that's says, okay, how many cold calls, how many emails did you send today? And it's the first thing, it's very obvious. It's sitting on my desk. And the goal is to basically track over time that I'm improving every day, that I did more than the day before. And this reminds me of my goal and my task. On top of that, similar to what I said before, I make sure that any temptation during the focus time is away. I don't have my phone in the room with me. I just want to focus on doing that one desired task. And sometimes I need to say, today I'm going to forget about everything else. I'm just going to do outreach. I'm not going to all the other things that I think are important. I just forget. I just want one task for today. I'm just going to focus on that task, and the goal is to execute it 100% thoroughly. So making it simpler for your brain. Don't bombard your brain with different notifications and tasks. That's going to lower your productivity, right? Just make it as simple as possible. Productivity by subtraction, essentially.
Yeah,
Remove-
I was. Yeah, if I look tired, I worked a lot last night, so was working on some blogs actually and collaborating and looking at some studies. So that will come out soon. If you want to check our website at awedigitalwellness.com, we have some blogs, some audio podcasts as well, and many resources. And this blog looked at multitasking. So I was looking at some studies, some American studies, some Chinese studies, and you know, bottom line is, we talked about this before, there is no real multitasking in the brain. It's
no.
only task switching, right? So if you're doing many tasks, and each time you switch tasks is kind of distracting you and making you less productive and focused. And that's what we're talking about. So how can you design your environment and your schedule, um, your windows of time and your physical space to give you the most opportunity to be focused on a task, right? And to choose the task with intention, right? So you can potentially be focused on looking at TikTok videos for 2 hours as well. But is that what you want? If you do it with intention and that's your plan,
Yeah,
then
if you block it out in your calendar, say like, okay, just 12 to 2, I'm just going to watch TikTok videos.
yeah,
You've done a good job at it, intentionally designing your environment and your calendar, right?
yeah,
But the key is, and this is something that Tony Robbins advocates with RPM system. And I think I mentioned this on a few weeks ago on the podcast. But you think of the task, right, and then you block it out in your calendar, right? Not 5 hours, but just an hour and a half to work on one specific task. Get that task done, do it well, and do it thoroughly, right? Block out any other distractions during that time. If you don't need your computer, close that, put it in a different room. If you don't need your phone, put it in a different room, right? Just focus on that one single task, monotasking efficiently. Well, it doesn't matter if you do it slowly, just focus on doing that one thing.
so another thing that will affect focus is stress, right? So are you distracted? Also, are you calm, right? So what,
Right.
is your environment giving you calm? I see, some plant behind you,
Oh, yeah,
right? Greenery, like the nature is calming.
yeah.
Sound, is it distracting? Like I was on a meeting earlier this morning, and my neighbor's dog is barking, right? So that's a little bit distracting. You might have like noise, appliances, planes. I don't know, depending where you are. Noise is distracting, visual distraction, um, and what is those distraction giving you again, calm or not, or are there no distraction? Right? And if there's absolutely no distraction, that might also be you're not in alert mode and you're drowsy, right? So it's always about a balance. It's about being aware of what you need and what you see. But as you know, we are doing we're helping the world being calmer and more focused and have more awe in their life in our resets. So if you guys want to check out our resets, we have access on our website again, or our Patreon that we launched early January. Try our resets, and that's a way to kind of exactly what the word is: reset, nervous system reset, bringing calm, and designing those resets or pause in your day doing it with us or others, doing it by yourself, but finding also the pause and the calm in your day to say, well, when you're stressed and you have to do this and that, maybe you're not even multitasking, you're just stressed thinking about which task you're
Right.
going to do, right?
Right.
So bringing back the calm and then the intention, the attention, and the focus.
A lot of it has to do with internal regulation, of emotions. And once you add stress to the equation, obviously, I think it puts your nervous system into like a defensive alarm sort of state. Not only is it more difficult to relax, but obviously it's a lot more difficult to focus. That's why they say a lot of people with ADHD, maybe they're living through some sort of embodied trauma, right? Their system is alert. Their system is not willing to relax. And that's why the attention is so sporadic in these people as well.
Well, I go to those neuroscience conference because I'm a neuro geek, but also because we're trying to find evidence-based neurological solution that actually help people, right? So it's not just about going to the talking about which region of the brain. It's actually how is it practical for you in your day-to-day life? How can we bring that novel, new, cool science, but really make it applicable, right? So we know that your nervous system is important for your well-being, for your mental well-being, and for your focus productivity, right? So how can we use these findings of knowledge to help people with many tools and with this awareness interactive podcast to help them understand that a calm nervous system, a good vagal tone is essential for focus and wellness.
Of course, and I think we've spoken about some of the strategies that people can use to have a calm, focused, relaxed mind. Vagal tone is not an alarm state. Meditation is a really useful one. Attending one of our digital resets, it's another option, of course. Going for a walk, going to the gym. One of the best non-medicative options, I would say, to enhance focus if you have ADHD, if you've been diagnosed with ADHD, is to just go for a walk outside. Just go 5 minutes for a walk and then come back, drink
And,
water.
and that also can be designed, right? So I had a long stint where I would take a full hour walk.
Nice.
Now I haven't been able to do it as frequently the last few weeks. But yeah, for weeks, every day, same time, around sunset, preferably to have the nice nature as well as the physical and all that. So yeah, that was a pure design on knowing that at that time I can go and do that and come back and work more or spend time doing other things. But that was designed in my day in a time capacity. I do have talking about walks. I do live in Canada, and I think there was just a video of me on YouTube, on LinkedIn, doing cold exposure. So it's quite cold, but I did some study to see like how this cold and temperature affect focus, attention, and cognitive ability. I did not do some study. I did some research, and here's the study finding. If you want to put up on the screen the first study, which is the impact of different environmental condition on cognitive function by Taylor et al. And this was in 2016 in Frontiers Physiology. And the findings, if we go to the next image, is that coal is actually, in general, negatively impacting simple and complex tasks, right? In this study, it says that there is less conclusion of cold versus heat and hypoxia. Hypoxia is when you don't have enough oxygen. that could be in high altitude or for other states that you'll reach hypoxia. And cognitive function is linked to focus. There's other factors, but in here we look at specifically cognitive function. And there was kind of a caveat where in the study they said that tyrosine, which is a food supplement, can help maintain cognitive function in very hot and hypoxic or cold condition. So there needs to be more research, like we always know. But just to say, well, okay, so if I'm doing cold exposure for minutes or hours, am I losing my focus? And I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing, others are doing, or I'm saying things that are scientifically accurate. And then I did some more study that explained that if it's cold exposure, which is normally less than 20 minutes, then it can have a short alertness factor, and we know that it also affects dopamine and endorphins. So cold exposure doesn't really increase focus, but it doesn't decrease focus if it's not long exposure. Not the same to be said for heat. And then here we talk about heat and hypoxia, and there's another study that we can show that focus specifically on heat. And this is more recent study, 2025 study by Vasil Kapoulou, that looked at a big methodological study looking at articles in 61 countries, 14.5 million students, and looking at long-term heat exposure. And it impairs students learning complex tasks and simple tasks, right? Reading, math. And it also mentioned that if you have lower socioeconomic group, then you have more impact. Why is that? If it's very hot and you don't have money, then you don't have AC and other ways to not be on the heat, right? So all that to be said, if you're living in very hot or very cold region, be wary about that. If your house is very cold or very house, or where you're studying or working, some people work outside, right? So if it's very hot or very cold, again, that's an environmental factor that you try to mitigate or control. We talked about tyrosine, which is a supplement, but there might be other ways to go in and out of the cold, and to take that into consideration if you want to consider focus and attention.
Very interesting. Actually, it reminds me of a study that I wanted to also talk about today. That was talks about the attention restoration theory. Alfredo, you can take that chart that I sent you and put it up there. But basically, it's a theory that's been developed by Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, and it suggests that urban environments drain our attention,
Yep.
while natural environments provide soft fascination that allows our focus to recharge. So there have been some indoor environmental quality studies, like MDPI in 2025, that shows that variables like CO2 levels, humidity, ideally 16 to 19%, and diffused lighting have a measurable impact on cognitive load and EEG verified focus. So here on the graph, you see humans' mental condition and attention. And so direct attention starts to interact. It reaches a pinnacle essentially as time goes on. As time goes on, your attention tends to lapse essentially with these variables that I had mentioned in our environment. So CO2 levels, humidity, and diffused lighting. And so once it goes up again, it seems like, okay, yeah. So once it goes up again, you're activating, you're in the natural environment, which you see on the right side. Being in an organic environment tends to make our directed attention go up again. And so if somebody is having trouble focusing, right, if they're in the office all day, going outside to a garden with trees, it actually helps restore your attention essentially. So it actually confirms a lot of what we had been saying before.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about Montreal. We have more than 1,000 parks here, so uh,
It's all frozen in the wintertime, though. You don't
it's
get to see any leaves. It's
now.
just all frozen. All you can do is
But
cold plunges.
snow is beautiful, and we have a reset in our Patreon about snow, which I
Yeah.
really suggest you try.
Yeah.
Coming from a snow loving perspective,
Mhm.
there's ski, there's racket, there's many other snowshoeing, skating. Now it's the Winter Olympic right now, guys. Right, so
Oh
enjoy
yeah, it's
snow.
fun to watch.
Um, but yeah, I was also aware of that theory. Thank you for sharing the graph. I did not see the specific graph, so that's great. And there are some very good advances in that theory, and it's also being expanded to. There was some newer research that took the same theory and tried it with social settings.
Mm.
So the same thing that you could do with nature to restore your attention was found in social gathering.
Mm.
So go for a walk with your friend. So you'll do two things at the same time in nature. And I think all this is also to come back to, like, we really have to design our environment for focus
Mhm.
and attention, because we're living in cities. We're sitting down instead of walking. We're looking at screens most of the time, right?
Mhm.
So we're basically in an environment that's not meant for focus or for well-being. It's not, our body or brain are not designed to be in this environment, right? So if we
Yeah.
want to have this attention and focus, we have to be kind of finding solutions around it.
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to cite was a book, and I'm sure many people have heard of this, Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. So Johan Hari has been he's been a real powerhouse in terms of books. He wrote the Chasing the Scream, which is actually about addiction. You can cite that next time on the next podcast. But Stolen Focus is really about why we have this collective loss of focus, and it's not a personal failing of willpower, but it's a systemic crisis. And so there's 12 deep causes that he identifies that act as environmental pollutants, essentially. So he's also advocating against digital detoxes, because he says it's like wearing a gas mask in a polluted city. He says that we actually have to change like the air that we breathe. So when thousands of engineers, from the top universities in the world are on the other side of your screen designing apps to hack your attention, individual willpower is essentially an unfair fight. And so you have this switch cost effect, which is a major pillar in the work that he writes. And it cites research showing that when you're interrupted, it takes an average of 23 minutes to actually return to the original level of deep focus that you had before.
Yeah,
And because the modern environment interrupts us every few minutes, most of us operate at a permanent cognitive discount, essentially. So what
that's
you
why I'm stupid. Okay, thank
wait, that's what you said?
you.
I didn't say it. You said that. Exactly. So there's three layers of attention, right? Spotlight, which is your immediate focus. This is stolen by notifications and pings. Starlight, which is your long-term goals, writing a book, for example. This is stolen by the constant churn of the short term. And then the daylight. So this is your ability to see clearly and reflect. This is stolen by chronic speed and lack of mind wandering, right?
Mm.
And so essentially trying to forge willpower in an environment that is essentially stealing focus away from us is just a futile effort. That's why environmental design, physical environmental design, is the way that you can actually fight back in 2026.
And it's interesting that thanks. I mean, great information. And
Mhm.
you talked about, like, the fact that it's stealing your mind wandering, which should come back to what we were talking about, potentially about the new research saying that mind wandering might be useful for, not for attention, but for consolidating memory, right? And kind of being able to go back, right? So too much mind watering, or too, like, also the default mode network is responsible for ego and other things that are not very good for happiness. Yet, my goal in the last 3 years since I wrote, my first book, yes, I did have enough starlight to write a book or two or three. So I guess I can have sustained focus. But the point being, that I've been looking at ways that the default mode network is useful, because in many ways it's kind of giving you like survival mode, um, grandiose, like me, I'm important, I'm constructing the world in a very subjective way. Uh, but there are definitely some great things about the default mode network, including creativity, and now perhaps memory,
Mm.
and good link with that book. And any other findings? Very interesting book. I think I might have to put it on my list. So share more.
Yeah, so a lot of different findings, but he looks at environmental design through a much wider lens than just the screens, essentially, and talks about the nutritional environment. So the Western diet causes energy spikes and crashes that result in brain fog,
Yeah.
make it impossible for the brain to maintain the steady state required for focus. And then he talks about the physical environment. So he points to rising levels of pollution and even the decline of free play for children, arguing
Yes.
that if children aren't allowed to navigate a physical environment independently, they don't develop the muscles of attention, right? So, and then he brought up this concept called cruel optimism in the book. And so this is the practice of offering someone an individual solution, right? Just use an app timer, right?
Mhm.
But for a massive systemic problem like the attention economy. So it's going to be a multifaceted solution. And
Yeah, it's
um,
not an easy one because it's pervasive, and the the solutions don't work, right?
right.
Um, just talking about play for children and for adult. I've been doing studies on play for quite a bit. I'm working on a book called Beyond Play, which will be
Hmm.
in probably a year or two. Still doing a lot of research, but working with tech, with a pioneer in historian and play, and designing play and toys for kids. I have a friend of mine that's designing and selling toys for kids. But it's not just about the toys; it's about the environment, right? And it's about the concept of unstructured play and learning to use play as a form of learning, right? Play is actually a form of low stake learning, right? There is a possibility that you lose, but if you lose in a game of Monopoly, you don't actually go bankrupt in real life, right? So you're kind of playing at being,
Yeah.
right. If you're play fighting with your brother, you're not actually in a danger fight with
Yeah.
right.
I heard somebody talk about like this is why video games are so appealing to also to young boys and a lot of people with ADHD is because you are simulating an experience with consequences, right? In a game, like if you're playing Call of Duty and you get shot and you get killed, right? Those are consequences in the game that are not real, right? But essentially, it feels like it's a form of play. It's a simulacrum of real life experience, and
Mhm.
that's why it's so satisfying for people.
Yeah, and there is some further theories of play in terms of one of the ways to conceptualize play is broadening your experiences, right? So you're you're gaining courage to do something that you might not do if it wasn't in a play mood, right? You might say, "Well, this looks dangerous. I won't do that." But if you
Yeah.
do it in a play that is okay, it's a higher stake than you're willing to, but not the full stake, right? And another aspect of it is, and I did a podcast recording lately. We're talking about like improvisation, which is also kind of a way to uh, you have to accept what the other person is improvising, and you
Hmm.
say yes and right. So you have to switch your mind and accept
Yes,
whatever you're
and
doing now
yeah.
and do it right. Basic role playing is also very good as a form of play. There is like a
Hmm.
typical. I use my brother still roles play. I used to do the Dungeon and Dragon and all that mage and geek stuff. Um, but it's actually very useful to be able to be put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? And now in
Right.
coaching in therapy, we use role playing with that. I'm working with couples, and I make them role play, and there's all types of activities that can use that type of play, and those are the things that I'm studying the specifics, but these is kind of the good ideas that I can share with you and the others today as
Hmm.
we bring more play. And as you might know or remember, our AI chatbot Lumi has all of those concepts already and is ready to help you with your happiness. So
Check it
go
out on our website, awdigitalwellness.com.
and
And it's
one
and
of
it's available to anyone who wants to use it.
yeah, Lumi is there. It is ethical AI, as we know by now, and it knows some of the concept that we've been working hard to bring to make the world happy. And one of them is play, right? So one of the 8 P's is play, and we talked a bit about it, but there's more details on how to incorporate that in your life. Yesterday, I was in the car, singing karaoke by myself and dancing. So that's a
Mhm.
form of play, and
Yeah.
yeah, I was quite happy. More awe moments. So in term, and yeah, that was the environment. I'm in the car. I have to drive somewhere, but I designed it with music and a good mood. So I had focus.
I think we sang together once in the car too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You can find that video online as well.
So you know, if you're listening, if you're watching this video, like, look around you. What's making you focus and not in your environment now? What could be better? What's making you calm?
Mhm.
Making you anxious or angry? And yeah, Mark mentioned just the fact that your device or something is in the room with you, even if it's not in notification, even if it's not bothering you, just the fact that you know that it's there is, and there is some scientific study that shows that it decreases your attention and it decreases your
Right.
memory.
If there's any scientific studies that show that having a device with you in the environment
Yeah,
will,
there is.
yeah,
There's more than one. I don't have their
we have to
reference
get those
here,
for the
but
next
yeah,
next time.
next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, Christian, is there anything else that you want to add on the topic of environmental design that maybe we didn't cover? That any practical piece of advice that people could take home with them today?
Um, as we talked about, right? So designing or planning is much better than having to do it freestyle at the end. Although I love to freestyle, and we also did that, I think, Mark. Um, but in terms of your day to day life, you might want to have a little bit more structure, and it doesn't mean you can't have fun and you can't go away from that structure. But
Hmm.
just to plan a little bit more on asking yourself those questions, right? We talked about many things. Maybe people know minimalism and what's that Japanese lady Kondo, Marie Kondo,
Marie Kondo, yeah, yeah.
who says like, "Does this give you joy?" Right?
Right, right.
Subject, right? So, is this environment giving you peace and focus? Think about this. Ask yourself those things, right?
Hmm.
Um, is listening to Chris and Mark giving you peace or a headache? Let us know
Yeah,
in the Q&A. And we talked about sound, we talk about light. There's so many factors, right? So the more you raise your awareness that your environment is not neutral, right? So that's kind of the advice. Your environment is not neutral. It affects you and people around you, right? So just keep that in mind, be aware of it, and try to tweak it a little bit so that it's more conducive
yeah.
to what you want to do.
Look for patterns. Look for patterns, and if you notice that things are just not working with the current environment, then just try to change it.
And what are one or two, questions or advice that you have for the audience as we're winding down?
Yeah, I think I've touched upon a lot already in terms of practical pieces of advice. Leaving your phone out of your room or the place that you work in is number one. If you have trouble getting things done, just tell yourself, today I just want to do this one project, this one important thing, and just make your entire focus to achieve that outcome. Block it in your calendar as well, and prevent any distractions, right? We're talking about higher productivity by means of not distraction, subtraction,
Minimalism. And
minimalism.
don't be afraid. When you're in your honeymoon and you have something that you need to have your attention in your wedding night.
Hmm.
You put a do not disturb sign because it's really important, right? You need to do something, right? So
Absolutely.
if you have important things to do, put up a do not disturb. Like, I'm doing this. This is important, right? Um, and one last thing we didn't talk about as I'm thinking about it, sound. If you're listening in audio or sound is important, right? So is there noise around? Is there, like, do you have kids around running? Do you have dogs, right? And do you need? Are you in a coffee shop? Are you distractible by sound? So don't be afraid to use headphones or headphone music that is focused, right? So, for instance, I love art and music, and we can talk more about that. But for me, different type of music are for different type of tasks, right? So if I'm reading, I'm using classical music or jazz because there's no words. If I'm working, I can use things with words, right?
Hmm.
So know the music, know the sound, make something that's conducive to your focus. And there's also this trick, white noise, right? So some people use it to sleep, but it can be useful in certain circumstances to focus. And of course, the best sound is listening to our digital resets. So check that out if you have a chance. In the meantime, reach out to us for any other question, comments on all our social. We will be
Hmm.
back next week with some guests. So we have, I think, guests in the two next podcasts in February.
Nice.
Looking forward to introduce new people to the podcast. As we are also guests in other podcasts, we'll let you know where we're solicited to speak and collaborate with other great personalities around the world. Um, the next stream will be the power of co-regulation, focus that spreads. Next
Mm.
Friday.
Nice. Can't wait to have everyone join us for next time. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We talked about environmental design for attention. If you have any questions anytime, feel free to check out our page, AW Digital Wellness, on LinkedIn. Follow us on Instagram. Ada is aw dot
Wellness.
wellness, exactly.
I don't even have
YouTube.
Instagram, and I know it's
There you
all.
go. There you
Come
go.
on,
That's environmental design right there. And um, all other platforms, X. Feel free to DM us on LinkedIn as well if you have any questions following this podcast, anything on your mind. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time.
always a pleasure, Mark. Have a good rest of the day.
Sure. All right. Bye bye.